Okay, so now that's recording.
Go slow. Try to record light. It's not, you're only partially complete. And I need a lamp in here, do I not? On
Just
this.
another one. Just another one of those lights.
And then that, and then there's this. This right here. Should I talk?
You can if you want. It's recording.
I'm right here showing what I talked about in our assignment with the raw edge of the fabric, folding it in just a tiny bit and making sure I'm stitching straight on it, making sure that that little fold runs right in that little foot. And I hold it. Notice how I do this. This is in lieu of a foot that does your rolled hem, because many sewing machines do not have a rolled hem foot, and they're wonderful and they do great work, but this is the first roll section of the same thing. Right here I have the corner. In my directions I told you to sew left side and right side, or top and bottom, not corner perpendicular sides, so that when you came to a corner like this, this side is already completely finished, and here I have the corner and I'm turning this raw edge that was sewn down over as tiny as I can turn it, narrow, and arranging it this way so that I can put my needle down into it and stitch this second line of stitching. But this is where I switch to my blind hem foot. Okay, I almost forgot to do that. This is where I'm going to switch to my blind hem foot. And if you don't have a blind hem foot, you can just keep on the machine your regular foot, just the one that stitches everything. And I lost my little turn here, so let me get that back and line it up here so that this blind hem foot will, let me move my needle to the left just a little bit, and I'm going to start by putting the needle down into the fabric so I know that it's already there, and then I just roll it and let this little guard right here run right along that edge, and I will stitch it down this way all the way to the end. It's just it takes a little more time than rolled hem foot, but you get the same result. You get a really nice narrow hem, and it's going to end up looking just like that. And we'll trim off some of these threads that came on here, and I could even come back in here and stitch from here to the end to straighten that up better. Always when you're demonstrating, it doesn't work as well. This is done on organza, and this rolled hem foot, so it rolled with one turn because I ran it through the little teeth of that rolled hem foot, and that's wonderful, and it works nicely on a curved edge, but not every machine has one, And like I was showing you on the orange fabric, you can get the same result. Let me show you right now how to find straight grain. Can you see here? Stop. What I'm going to show you right now is the rolled hemmer. And I'm having to work on my Bernina in my sewing area because this rolled hemmer foot fits my Bernina and not the Bernina from the MCC classroom. Let me show you this. You can see the features here. It's a rolled hem little groove, and it rolls the fabric for you as you get it wedged in there correctly. And here is some that I've already done. Here is some that I've already done. And I'm going to, it's a little harder to start back in after you've stopped, but watch how I pull the fabric. If you can see that, I have the foot raised just a little and I pull the fabric up into that little curved or curled groove. And I'm using thread that is very easy to see. It's a way different color. I'm going to hold my threads and I'm going to try to start in here, and just sometimes the ends will not be your best work, so prepare for that maybe you'll cut a few ends off, make things a little extra long. But you see how I have this folded and pulled up into that little curved area. So as I sew, and I pull from the back too to help it feed through, it should curve over and sew the way I need it to. And I'm going around a curved edge, so it's a little more difficult with a curved edge. You really have to feed it in there, and you see how I'm holding it, making sure if it doesn't feed quite right, lift the presser foot and realign everything. And I see here it's just trying to, it likes the straight grain. So I'm not going super fast, but I will tell you this much. If I were using an organza with the regular small, narrow turned hem, it would be every bit as difficult, and it probably wouldn't take any less time. So just make sure to, you should always lift when your needle is down. It holds it in place. But I'm going around an edge, and I know this seems kind of slow, but trust me, it turns out really nice. And as you go, you get more skilled. You just kind of see what's working. But you see what's coming out the other end here is a really nice rolled hem. And with one time through the whole process. The other rolled hem without this little foot takes one stitching line to sew the tiny part in, and then another time to roll it into place and get it all set up. So I'm gonna stop there, but that's basically what it's gonna look like. All right, and I could go clear to the end. Now, one of the things that I want to tell you is that it's a little bit more difficult on a curved edge, and honestly, if you don't like what you did, you can go back and pull it out and try it again. I mean, you can always try it over, but that's basically how it works. I'm going to show you on a straighter grain, and remember how I taught you to pull a thread and find the straight of grain of your fabric so that you can basically see where to cut it right on the grain. Another point that I want to make clear with this is organza. Any lightweight fabric that is like an organza or a lightweight silk or a lightweight taffeta, needs a narrow rolled hem like this. It needs a narrow rolled hem. A wide hem won't work on it, and vice versa. On a heavier fabric, a narrow hem like this would never in a million years work. Okay, so think about the depth of hem when you are making a garment. You want to make sure that you have the appropriate hem depth for that type of fabric, or if it's a garment, or any type of item that you're making. So here I am. I'm going to start this, put my needle down. I'm going to start it on a straight grain edge, and this will feed through even more easily than that curved one. Curved one, you're just kind of fighting it, but it's worth it. And you also, with that curved one, could even feed in, if you get skilled enough at it, you could feed in a little wire that could cause frilly, curvy bottom hem edge. Just use any kind of tool, any kind of item that will help you get this through. And then once you get enough that you can pull it from the back, you can kind of hold it better. All right, I need to get moving on this faster. You're gonna think that rolled hem foot doesn't work very fast. I've just got to get it going here, get it working right, so that it works better. It takes a little skill to get it to the job you want it to, but it will. I haven't sewn anything since wedding dresses, probably, with this for quite a long time. I really do, to be honest, kind of prefer that turn the raw edge in, the narrow hem, and then second line stitching using the blind hem foot to top stitch it. It works really nicely. But you can see how you just have to figure out where to position everything, but it makes a really nice little rolled hem for you. All right, and if you can see that, that's what it's going to look like. All right, so let me cut my threads there, and I'm going to show you on a more substantial piece of fabric. This is a silk, but it's a very well constructed, not stiff, but not slippery. It has a hand to it that causes it not to slip a lot, which is the organza slips. So let's put our needle down, get the rolled edge positioned, and feed through a little bit until we can get enough to pull from the back side. But on a straight edge like this, it should go much quicker and easier. But it's a nice little foot that makes a really nice hem, and it takes a little skill to get it to work right for you, but once you get it working and figure out, most of it is where to position the fabric right here. And you see I'm really trying to feed it in there, making sure it's rolled. If it comes unrolled, it won't stitch it right. It will miss parts of it. So you really have to hold it in there in the right place, and you can see that it's making a nice little rolled hem. I'm not making this probably look as quick and easy as it can, because I haven't actually used it on anything big for a long time, but this is basically how it works. So hopefully you can see that and appreciate it. I'm kind of running into a rough patch right here that is not working super well, but that's basically what it's going to look like. Really narrow little hem. Let me try a little bit more on this side where it's kind of gone past that ravelly patch, and sew it to the end. Get it positioned in there. See if we can get it, show you it moving a little faster. Probably not selling anybody on this. It's like, wow. But it doesn't go super fast all the time. Some fabrics it will. It depends on your fabric. But once you get it working, it's really, really nice. It'll hem. If you had, for instance, a tablecloth or a straight skirt or anything that has a straightness at the bottom, straight grain, it will hem it very nicely for you. But you have to really be careful that just the proper amount is rolled into this little section here. Let's see how that came out. Oh gosh, didn't need to lose those. All right, so there we have our little straight rolled hem, and you can see that it works very nicely on fabric of this type. It works just fine on a fabric of this type. This is what it most of all will help. And this is the portion that I just barely sewed. Okay. And then this is the straight part on the organza. Like to edge a ruffle, if you made a ruffle. The next thing I wanted to show you was not with the rolled hem foot, but with the regular foot. I've kept talking about putting in applique with a cutout behind it, and I wanted to show you a little bit closer up how to stitch around this. I've talked about this, and this is on a straight stitch, okay? Here I have organza, and you can see where it's the organza with this little hem, rolled hem. Right here, these frayed little parts, and I can see where the weave is, the woven parts. So to find the straight of grain on any fabric, this is an easier one than most, but pull a thread here and have it go back through the actual fabric, and I can see that right there, that is my straight of grain, because the woven fabric thread will tell you where the straight of grain is. And I might not have known that if I hadn't pulled the thread. That's how you find the straight of grain. And so I could just pull the thread and go ahead and trim this whole section here. I can see this is a little higher than right in here. So if I wanted to true this up, I would probably trim a little lower than where I just pulled that, but I know that I've got this straight of grain right along here, and I can even kind of see it. So the lowest portion on your edge of fabric is where you want to trim up next to when you're finding the straight of grain. So that's basically a little bit, not super even, but that's my straight of grain. All right, and that's what you're going to want to do to be able to do an edge little hem. Works really much better that way. So this is the applique with the cutout on the back, with the lace placed on the front of the t-shirt, and then the stitched on, and then the back is cut away. It's like a cutaway lace applique. And this is what I'm going to show you right now, how you would stitch this. This is kind of like the rolled hem foot. You have to raise your presser foot a lot. I'm using a contrast color so that you can see my stitching. But you're going to stitch around the edge of the lace piece like this, and it has a lot of little turns and twists. So pivot with your needle down and stitch right along those outer edges. And some of it you're going to hand turn the wheel of the machine, so that if you have a matching thread, mine is contrast, of course, which I'm going to remove after we're done, but this is to show you how you're going to stitch down all those outer edges so that when you cut away in the back, you cut that portion of your shirt or garment away, it's going to leave really securely in place your little applique. All right, but you see how I use the hand wheel and turn the garment, and I did have to have this basted in place to begin with, but I stitch the edges, lift the presser foot, stitch a couple of stitches, lift the presser foot so I'm angled the correct direction, and this will get it stitched into place. And it shouldn't need zigzag or any other type of treatment. Okay, but let me pull it out and let you see basically what it looks like with that stitched in place. Okay, and if it were done just in white thread, it would hold it nicely in place so that you can then go back on the underside and clip close to the edge. If you had a fray fabric, you'd have to do some type of sealant on the edges of your fabric where you cut, but because this is a really tightly woven t-shirt, it works just fine with not being secured that way. All right, so that's how you're going to do that. All right, thank you. Do another one.
Go to start over again.
Okay, sure. It looked like this was catching on some tape residue, and so I couldn't finish the stitching very well, but I wanted to show this. I went ahead and finished it. I trimmed away the tape residue portion, threw it in my trash, and went back and stitched this, and see how nice it looks. See how straight it is. And I wanted to go one more time to show you. I've experimented with this fabric a little bit. Get a start on it so you've got something to pull, and twist it over this little curved center portion, the little guard, and keep it in this tight a fit here, and it should stitch nicely enough for you. And if it starts pulling away, readjust and see how nice that looks, and just move along and get all the way through. Now this is super wonderful for making ruffles, little small, like a 2-inch long ruffle, or some type of piece that would be really hard to hem otherwise. But this shows you basically, finally, how quickly and nicely it will stitch a very tiny narrow rolled hem. All right, thank you. The other day when I was showing you the invisible zipper installment, I didn't feel like there was enough said, because sometimes you need something to go back to and look at. So hopefully this will give you something to look at. Here are two sample sides. This is the under portion. This is the public side over here. We've got our interfacing strips placed beside and inside the seam allowance. The seam allowance is pressed so that there is a line, a pressed line to follow. And then it is the best thing to do is to lay your invisible zipper out so that the little pull tab moves upward in the correct position, because this little pull tab right here is going to end up sticking out on the public side of your zipper, and the rest of it's just closed up, completely closed up, like a closed zipper with the little pull tab sticking out at the top. So what I wanted to show right now was the other day I didn't show it being basted in, and this is the first thing that we're going to do is utilize that little pressed line. That is the line along which we are going to lay the zipper teeth right up there and then pull them back a little bit as I baste it into place. And it's not going to take a super long amount of time. It's time that is very well spent. The other day when I demonstrated the stitching in of the zipper without the basting in place, it got just a little bit crooked. I was trying really hard to not let it get crooked, but I went ahead and removed the stitches. This is the exact one I was working on. I removed the stitches because I wanted it to look better. So I'm going to baste it in here to the bottom side and then go over to the other side and baste that one in. Stop. So here I went ahead and basted in this side and the other side. And your zipper will get a little twisty, like when you have one side turned this direction, your zipper is going to twist. You have to be in charge of and mindful of where the zipper pull is, because you're working on the inside with an invisible zipper. All of this is the inside, and it's stitched on to just the inside seam allowance, okay? And so all of this is going to be ending up inside the garment, underneath. This right here is the public side. And this is the side that you want your zipper pull to come to the top, and just the zipper pull will show. The rest of it is closed up, just tight as a sewn seam. Stop. Here we are at the machine, and you see that I put on the regular zipper foot. That was the part that I showed you. You could do either interchangeably with the invisible zipper foot or the regular zipper foot. And we approach it pretty close to the same way. I'm going to unzip, just unzipped, and I'm going to turn open the zipper underneath part and prepare it by, and this is, like I said, just the regular zipper foot. Get some kind of a tool to help you manage your pulling back of the zipper teeth and the pulling to the other opposite side, your zipper tape, and then get it moving along. And we're stitching right as close as we can. We're going to pull it just like we did the cording. Remember how we did that, the cording piping? We're moving it just the same way, pulling it so that the teeth, and that's one of the reasons this basting holds it in place better for you than the other day. I was fighting it when I had it not sewn in. But this way you can stitch it in and it comes out pretty well. Stop. Tell me when.
Right.
Here it is stitched in right along the zipper teeth, right along those zipper teeth. And this will do it just the same way your invisible zipper foot gets it stitched in right along the zipper teeth. All right, all the way to the end. And then you pull out your basting stitch. To show you, we're going to be talking about buttonholes here in our next class. And I wanted to show you some other things you can do with a zigzag. This type of lace, this is on the end of a slip, and it's just a little trim of lace, could be done with a loose zigzag stitch, not a real tight like a buttonhole stitch. It could be done that way, but probably better done in a straight stitch. And I'm going to do it along the edge here in a straight stitch with a dark thread, which I will remove. But see how, as we go along, I have it pinned in, and you see how I turn and the material going through, I zigzag it. I go fairly slow, and when you have to, lift your presser foot and just keep it moving. Go slow. If you can go slower than this if you need to, but just to stitch it on to the end of the piece. And that is, to me, a completed assignment. You can see here, because I have done it in darker thread, you can see what the stitching would be, but it would be done in white. But if one of your items that you turn in as a completed project is just putting lace on the end of something, a pillowcase, a slip, anything, that's good enough for me. So this is the finished lace that I stitched on. I went ahead and changed the thread color so that it's white, and went ahead and put the lace on with white stitching on both the underside and the upper side. So if that's what you want to turn in for a project, like lace or some kind of trim on a pillowcase, or this is a slip, a half slip, if you want to do something like that, that's fine. You know, that's showing creativity and that you see how to use your machine to do that. This is, back in the few weeks back, I showed you a ruffle. And this is a piece of organza that was gathered, and you see the 2 lines of long stitching, and then I pulled, you can see here, threads. Usually you pull the bobbin threads, pull both of them and pucker it up, pin on the ends of the piece that you want to sew it to, and your ruffle then gets distributed through the whole portion of the fabric you're stitching to. And you notice that I pinned it all. And the other part of this that I'm trying to make sure you see is this little hem. This was done with that rolled hem foot. Just made a beautiful little hem on the bottom of this piece of organza. So let me just stitch this on now that I have it all pinned into place, to just stitch it on here. Stop. So here we have this stitched on. It's all stitched on right along this outer blue line. Sometimes with ruffles, it's not a bad idea to stitch in between the 2 lines, the gathering lines, because that's the best place for it to be gathered properly. But here I have a strip of white silk bias. You can see it stretching, and this is going to sew on. I talked about this in one of our classes, and I never really got the job accomplished, but this is going to pin on here in a few places. This is going to wrap over the seam, that open seam, and cover it on the back side. One of the reasons I wanted to make this organza ruffle too is because I'm going to use it when we do our decorative stitching samples, probably this Wednesday coming up or the next week after that. So here I am, I have this pinned on, the bias strip pinned on, and then I'm going to turn it to the other side and use that line of stitching that where I stitched on our ruffle, and have that be where I stitch over to sew into place the bias, the silk bias strip. And that'll show you how to cover your seam that includes the ruffle. Okay? So stop. I wanted to show you how when the little bias silk strip was sewn on, remember, first of all, we sewed onto this side, we sewed on our ruffle, a little bit gathered, just slightly gathered, and you have to make sure it's evenly gathered. And then we stitched on to the same side that the ruffle was stitched on. We laid out our binding, the little silk binding, but we stitched it on from the opposite side where we had our line of stitching. And since I last could tell that I trimmed it quite a bit here, when it last filmed, it wasn't trimmed well enough. You have to trim it back so that the binding protrudes out enough that you can fold it and tuck it back under to make the binding edge, and finish the binding edge so that it tucks under and pins in place, like right here. Doing that right here. That one good part of it being a really soft silk that is this bias binding piece is that it folds and moves and manipulates and tucks really well, like I'm showing you right here. It just tucks under so easily. So prepare that and then we'll start sewing. I'm trimming off the excess seam allowance because I don't want it to be a really large piece turned under on the back side. And then I'm going to fold this over and put all of the rest of it inside and cover that. I need to trim it even smaller, but this is going to cover it this way. Cover all of that seam allowance and bind it with a bias strip. All right, so we'll stitch this into place. Let me make sure, get that started here. It's good to have it, this really, I need to trim a lot more, and I will go in and do that. I'm probably not going to stitch the whole thing, but this is the idea. Okay, to cover that on the back side, and that is really a poor job. So I'm going to go in and fix it while the camera's off and show you it in a better condition. But that's basically what it does. It folds over, tucks and covers everything, and then you just stitch right along here to stitch it all into place. We go with preparing by pinning, and now we're putting it under the machine, and I'm sewing right along the edge here. When you pin carefully and you have your pins in so that it holds everything in a real even shape from here to here, you can find a line, like I can find this little edge of the foot here to leave that much showing of this binding, and it should sew everything straight. You're just trying, you know how much I've tried to get you to sew straight. Just keep sewing straight along here. Learning to sew extremely straight is really important, and I see that's pulling the, making a little indentation there, so I'm taking that pin out because it's not going to help me with stitching it. And so stitch all the way to the end, and we'll remove pins and have a really nice little bound ruffle, bound on the back, ruffle, and looks really neat on this side, and then turning it over, you've got it finished and neat on both sides. And I'm going to use this ruffle to try some of the machine stitching a little bit later. Decorative stitching. All right. I have this circular piece here that was laid over the top of a round circle surface. It actually was on a stool, but it could be a round table. And then you measure down however far from the very top round edge, you measure down that many inches all the way around. This happens to be 7 inches, but you could measure 12 inches down and have this be the top edge at the edge of the round surface. And then this is the edge that you would trim along, so that's the same distance down from that edge all the way around. So here I am. I'm going to use a tool to turn and hold down this very first turned over edge and sew it into place. And I try to stay as straight as I can. I try to feed it in right on that inside part of the foot right there, so that I know it's in, the stitching is in the same place all the way around. And this is a curved surface, so it's a little harder, and you can't go very far before you have to turn more and hold it down. You see how I'm kind of pulling it back this way too, so that it stays. All right. I have gotten to the end of stitching this one time rolled up all the way to the end. That's what all of this is. And so now I'm switching out my regular foot for the hem foot, the blind hem foot. And we're going to utilize it to help make the double rolled hem. And I did a little sample of it here. Here's the hem with this part rolled up one more time and sewn into place. And so then we'll have our tablecloth or our centerpiece little cloth ready to go. And it'll be nice and round. And the way to make a big tablecloth is just to use the same concept on just a bigger round surface. So here I am with my blind hem foot on, and I'm going to move my needle to the left of that center guard so that it will stitch inside along the side of the guard. And then we hold it like this, roll it, and keep it really tight against that guard in the center. And just basically do the same sort of thing that you did for the first line of stitching, rolling it up, and just keep it in place and stitch it all the way to the end, and you'll have a nice rolled hem. Rolled once and then rolled a second time. Here we are with it all finished all the way around. You can see that it's a double rolled up once, rolled a second time, utilizing on that second time utilizing our blind hem foot with the needle moved to the left of the center, so that it ends up with a nice narrow rolled hem on a curved edge all the way around. And you'll really like this. After you finish it this way, if you wanted to, you could go in and put a little edge of lace, just stitch it on the underside here and stitch back through this line of stitching that you have on the top. Just do a second time stitching it. You could do any number of things on the edge here, a little ruffle or any kind of thing, but this is a pretty enough fabric. It'll serve as a really nice small tablecloth. I have buttonholes already made, and I'm going to show right here on this one the buttonhole procedure. Remember, we did these lengthwise basting stitches and then the crosswise stitches, and because I couldn't see wonderfully, I went a little high in my starting here because I couldn't see to the back there. But let me show you what we're going to do. Let me make sure I have this one. Let me mark kind of straight down. Right there is where I'm gonna put my needle down to start. And what, first of all, on this particular Bernina machine, I'm going to do is I have my marking, so I just have the crossbar marking, and I think I'm in the right place. But right up here, I'm going to go to the 0 right here, which is my buttonhole icon. And then on my computer, it comes up here. And what this is going to do is when I start, it'll start at the top and it'll come down the left side. And then I push at the bottom. When it comes to the bottom, as long as I want it, I push my reverse button right here. And it'll straight stitch up to the top. And I have to watch how far it goes so it doesn't go too far. And I push the reverse button again, and it will do the crossbar at the top, and then on its own it will zigzag down the right side, but I have to make sure I know where to push the reverse once again to make it do the bottom crossbar, and then I'll get a buttonhole that looks like that. So let me go ahead and start and get a good view of this. So here we're coming down here, and when I see that it's long enough, I push my reverse, and so it's going to straight stitch up to the top. When I see I'm at the top, I push that once again, does the crossbar, and then on its own it's coming down the right side. And when I get to the bottom here, I have to keep a good eye on it. And then I push that reverse again, and on its own it just stops when it's done. So here's my buttonhole. And then and you can see I came down just a little bit too far because I trying not to get in the way of the camera. I wasn't able to see super well, so I should have stopped just a little higher and pushed reverse, and it would have done that crossbar. But this is how you're going to cut it open. Puncture in the center, cut to one end, and then cut to the other end from the center so that you don't cut too far. Some directions will tell you to use a seam ripper. Well, they don't add into that definition buttonhole ripper, because it'll rip your buttonhole way too far. So there you go. And all of these would be cut open in the same way. All right, so crossbars and length bars, and then that's the way you're going to do your buttonhole. Here I have a curtain made out of sheer fabric, like you would use for a sheer at a window or a sheer in a bathroom over a tub. And what is showing here is buttonholes, evenly spaced and the same size, each one of them, so that a dowel, this is just for a sample, you would run a curtain rod, but a dowel run through to show how it could hang. So let me back up and then just push it together so that it pleats up the way. Looks really good. So let me back up and show you how it started. Here I have the opposing side to this side, the other selvage basically. So on the side that just was sewn, this is utilizing the selvage. So here I am on the opposing side of the fabric. I'm going to utilize the selvage once again, and selvage is really nice for this because it keeps a really even trimmed edge here. And you can tell right here, this looks like this because it was torn along the grain line. It's a little rough and probably needs to be trimmed up a little bit, but not nearly as badly as if it had just frayed and kept fraying, but to trim off those a little bit later. But what I'm going to do here is turn once and then turn once again and pin into place these turns so that when I stitch it doesn't pucker, because it likes to pucker. And then just make sure that you keep really straight as you pin along and go down the way. Just make sure to tuck completely in there your first roll of hem, and then the second incorporates all of what you just rolled in there, and then pin, pin, pin all the way down. Here I have the side hem, and it is straight stitched into place. And so I stitched that side in and then the other side. And I think that I didn't stitch in the other side yet so that I could show you. Here I have the side hem, and it is straight stitched into place. And so I stitched that side in and then the other side. And I think that I didn't stitch in the other side yet so that I could show you. Here I have some pins in and going to go here. Now this is similar to the hem in the red circle that was just hemmed, but this is a much wider hem, as you can see, and it's pre-rolled so that it stays in place. We don't have to tuck under one edge and then go back in and stitch it over. So the reason for the pins, I'm going to go ahead and sew right along here, and I would recommend slightly longer, just a little bit longer stitch length. I'm probably going to go up to a number 3 stitch length. And we have our tape here to kind of keep a guide on how wide to make this, but we're going to stitch right along this edge and just try to keep it as straight as you can all the way down. And it can get to be a long journey all the way down to the bottom. And if you see that, like here I see that it's a little narrow, I'm just going to widen it out a little bit, and as I go, I'm not going to have pre-pinned every single thing because sometimes the pins come out, but just a pin before you get to that spot. And it's always a good idea not to sew over pins like I just did. All right, I see here too, it's puckering a little bit. I can see I need to change my needle. It has a burr on it, so I'll do that. So here at the top, I'm going to use my other side because I have to have it the same width as my other side. And so here we have this seam or hem, this hem sewn in, not a seam, it's a hem. And so I want to make sure that I get this, it's going to be double rolled here. So I'm going to roll it down, and it's good to trim this off. It probably will end up inside, so it won't make any big difference, but it's not a bad idea to trim it off. It looks better, and any perfectionist sewer would tell you to do that. So let's be perfectionists. So we're going to roll it twice. Part of this is it stabilizes it. It's kind of like a self-interfacing, and it definitely is a self-facing, which is a backside to something, the facing. So here we are, and just make sure that periodically you go in and measure with the already stitched part so that you know you have it the right size. Stop. Periodically you're going to want to make sure to measure. Now I see here when I measure these that I've got this a little bit shorter, 1/8 of an inch or so shorter than the other side. So I'm going to move it back down so that it ends up the same size, and just make sure if there's a little gap up in here where you need to push more hem up into that space, because it's the way it looks, it keeps it from being see-through, it makes it more opaque, and structures it, gives it interfacing, a type of interfacing. So now I have it a little bit too long, so I'll just move it. Once you get it correct, then you can continue on. Okay, that's still just a tad long, so let me just move it. I don't know if you can tell I'm moving it, but just a tad. There we got it. So from there, I'm going to put my pins in and arrange that so that I can stitch along here and stitch it into place. That's how we do that. Now I have this ready to go to stitch this top portion of the curtain into place, and really grateful for pins. It helps me keep things really straight. And here I'm going to backstitch. Boy, if you have any kind of obstruction on your needle, I need to go in and get that changed. It'll surely show it in sheer fabric like this. So then remove our pins, and we're ready to mark where our buttonholes need to go, and we'll put them in. Here we have our thread through. It's through our the finger on our bobbin case. So that's going to go back in. That adds tension to the bottom portion, the under portion of the buttonhole. That's why we do it that way. And then we snap it in there, and here we have our space. I'm going to measure over how high to start here. How far down. The better way to do it is with my ruler. Put my ruler down right here. So I see that I'm basically about a 1/2 inch, so from that edge, just a little bit more than a 1/2 inch, so down. I'm going to put it right there. So I know that's basically this is going to be my perpendicular, or actually my vertical And that's going to be my horizontal right there, starting spot. So that's where I'm going to put my needle down and put it on buttonhole. I've got it on buttonhole. So here we're going to start, and I'm going to start with putting the needle down by hand, turning the wheel, and take my pins out, because on a buttonhole you're really going to have close stitching, which will make it really hit a pin for sure. So here we're doing our buttonhole. And this buttonhole is serving not to incorporate buttons, but to incorporate a curtain rod. Just another way to use a buttonhole. You could also use a buttonhole in this way for lacing up a vest or the back of a antique dress or costume, and just cut the holes open and have it be laced with thread or string, so that it works kind of like it used to back in the days when they didn't have so many buttons and didn't have all that we have now. They would have back long ago had to do buttonholes by hand. So here's our buttonhole, and then we'll clip it open and be able to thread our curtain rod through. Here is the selvage edge of this fabric. What I'm showing this demo today is utilizing a silk fabric and the selvage edge, which won't fray, and it makes a really nice edge to sew a straight stitch sewing on the lace. The first time we do it, or the first time it's sewn on, it goes on straight like this. Now that we've got the straight portion stitched on, just a straight line right along the edge of the selvage, I'm going to pin the other half, which also has selvage, and these are just scraps. When you do this with bigger pieces of fabric, it'll work even better. But I'm pinning this selvage edge, matching up, as you can tell, the other selvage edge, and knowing that I have that line of stitching on the opposing side. See how perfect and easy that is to just go in and use the line of stitching that I just barely created and match up those two edges so that we know we're getting it equally stitched in there, right in the very middle between those two, right where we want it to be. So just stitch all the way down. Probably good to remove pins so we don't hit them. And we can stitch all the way down, and we will have our lace sandwiched in between the two pieces. Here I am preparing this top portion to put some more buttonholes. I have several in. I have about 8 or 9 in. And I see that the distance between this buttonhole center and this buttonhole center is going to give me 2 3/4. So here I will measure from the very center cut center of that buttonhole to right here. I'll put my pin in at 2 3/4. And from that one, I'm going to measure on down and put in a pin at 2 3/4 so that I have them all even. And that'll just keep your pleats as it feeds onto your curtain rod. It'll keep all your pleats even. So find 2 3/4. Okay. Now I've got to make sure that I have, remember when we do buttonholes, I didn't show you this as I did that one a few minutes ago. We have to remember, feed the thread through the little eye that is in the bobbin case. Let me get it in there. Stop. Okay, so we've got it stitched right here. We've got the little, very tiny little portion of the lace you can see because we stitched right along that edge. Let me just show you. This is the tiny little piece that we stitch on the lace to adhere it, to stitch it in, and then we stitch the two sides together using that line that we originally stitched, and we have it now stitched in, and it's between the two pieces of fabric. You can do anything with that you want. You can have it be, you could have it down the side seam of a longer garment, or you could have it be at a hem, and you could pull the back side up so that you have a faced edge on the back, and the front has the lace extending out, and it's finished on both sides very nicely. So with creating the use of this lace, placing it wherever you want, that's the way you're going to do it and have it just turn out beautiful on both sides. Here is a satin pillowcase, and it's just a simple pillowcase that my husband likes soft, non-irritating bed clothing, and so we purchased this white satin pillowcase, and it's just very plain. Both sides look the same, so to decorate it up and create something, I took a piece of a big long section of lace that was used for one of my daughter's wedding dresses that I made her, and I just cut out one of the pieces. I think they were just, it was like this, but they were kind of attached on either side, so I just cut loose one of them, and as you can tell, I went in and basted. I did it with a turquoise thread so that you can see where it's done. And when this is being placed on, we're going to stitch it on with the needle in the pieces of the lace, but I'll have to move a little bit as I go. I'll have to move those sides a little bit, and you don't have to stitch completely on the edge the whole way around, but make sure that under edge is not in your way. You don't want to sew through everything because you'll have to pick it loose. But notice how I turn as I go, and some of the time I'm going to have to hand turn the wheel so that I can get around those little curves. So you see why I basted it on. If I hadn't done that, it would be moving all over the place. But you see how I'm using my right hand and my left hand to move our little lace piece and the pillowcase so that we can get it stitched on. And you just go around the edge. Now let me stop for a minute and show you. Here it is stitched on, and I'll pull out the thread here so the basting is gone, and you can see the stitching is right around in here. And you could, if you wanted to be really careful, you could go right along that edge, but you don't have to, because you can see how it's stitched on right here, and it's fine because it looks like it's part of the decoration. That probably the very best way would be right along the very edge, but I don't know that that is the strongest portion of this little decoration lace. The stronger portion of it is right around in here where we stitched, or you could go right along that little edge, right, that little string or thread edge right there. Okay, So let me do just a little bit more and I'll try going a little bit further inward. But you know, in the end, let me just say it this way. You sleep on a pillowcase, nobody's gonna ever go in there and see that you didn't stitch it right in a ditch beside that little piece of trim or cording. And what I'm doing here will work just fine. What's really nice about this is adding a decoration of this type makes this pillowcase really kind of a high-end pillowcase, going from just a regular satin pillowcase to a really kind of couture type pillowcase, and really nice for a wedding gift.